Sure. 3:40 now.
Some are having network issues. We'll gradually start. I welcome you all today. Am I audible, Kaushik?
Proceed, Didi, proceed. Yes.
Thank you, Kaushik. I welcome you all today. This is the 6th lecture in this series, Young Scholars, Visva-Bharati Young Scholars Lecture Series. Today, our esteemed speaker is Dr. Suranjima Saha from Pathu Bhavan. I'm very happy, and on behalf of my committee, I extend a warm welcome to you, Suranjima. May I now request Dr. Chitralekha Maiti to please introduce our speaker. Chitralekha.
Yes, Didi. Thank you, Vipashadi. Very good afternoon to all of you. First of all, I express my sincere gratitude to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Vidul Chakraborty, for his valuable guidance and continuous support. And also to my esteemed colleagues, especially the students, research scholars, and all the other listeners to be here as the part of this program. Thank you, Vipashadi, for giving me the opportunity to introduce our eminent speaker, as well as a thoughtful, knowledgeable, and kind-hearted person, Dr. Suranjima Saha. Dr. Suranjima Saha did her graduation and her master degree in English literature from the Department of English, Visva-Bharati, Shantiniketan. She was awarded her PhD degree by Visva-Bharati in 2019. She was supervised by our eminent professor, Professor Amrit Sen of the Department of English, Visva-Bharati. Her field of specialization is 18th century travel writing. She has been working as an assistant lecturer in Pathu Bhavana, Visva-Bharati, Shantiniketan since 2011. She has written multiple scholarly articles in literary magazines and e-journals like News India. Apart from implementing effective strategies to develop independent learners, she provides extensive mentoring for her students. She takes interest in music, painting, and writing poetry. Her first book of poems is due for publication. Thank you once again and welcome you again, Dr. Suranjima Saha, for your kind presence. We are eagerly waiting to enrich ourselves by your valuable words and contributions in this field. Now, the dais is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chitralekhadi, for introducing me. I'm humbled by your generosity. Thank you so much. Shall I carry on?
Yes, Didi.
Okay. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, our respected Vice Chancellor, my teachers, my colleagues, my students, and all who are present here virtually. My heartfelt thanks to all of you. As we know, the title of my paper goes like this: Writing in the Contact Zone, Itasamuddin's The Wonders of Vilayet. Now, I have broadly divided my paper into two halves. The first part deals with the theoretical framework. For this, I have applied Mary Louis Pratt's theory of the contact zone and transculturation. While the second half of my paper deals with references from the text to substantiate my point, and I have put forward my reading of the text. Okay. Mary Louis Pratt, in her book, Imperial Eyes, Travel Writing and Transculturation, which was published in 1992, has argued that the encounter between imperial or colonial culture and the indigenous cultures of the imperial periphery create a transcultured contact zone in the colonial space, where the imperial culture is assimilated and reworked in contact with the indigenous worldviews. She defines contact zone as, I quote, social spaces where disparate cultures meet, clash, and grapple with each other, often in highly asymmetrical relations of domination and subordination, unquote. Out of this transculturation, she argues, develops a new kind of contestatory writing, which she calls autoethnographic expression, in which the denizens of the colonial contact zone contest the cultural dominion of the imperial culture. She uses this term to refer to instances in which the colonized subjects undertake to represent themselves in ways that engage with the colonizer's own terms. She writes, I again quote, if ethnographic texts are a means by which Europeans represent to themselves their subjugated others, autoethnographic texts are those the others construct in response to or in dialogue with those metropolitan representations, unquote. She argues that Guaman Poma's review of the Inca history and the customs in his book, The First New Chronicle and Good Government, which was published in 1615, constitute a canonical instance of autoethnographic representation. Autoethnographic texts, according to Pratt, are not authentic forms of self-representation. Rather, they involve partial collaboration with the idioms of the conqueror. Such texts are typically heterogeneous on the reception end as well, usually addressed both to the metropolitan reader and to the literate readers of the speaker's own social group, and therefore to be received differently by each. Such expression is a very widespread phenomenon of the contact zone and becomes important in unraveling the histories of imperial subjugation and resistance. It is interesting to note that people from the peripheries began to travel to the centers of modernity and there began to reshape the meaning of culture of modernity itself. These peripheral travelers travel to the imperial center to learn, to gain access to the total record, as Raymond Williams calls it, of writing about the center periphery relations. And by comparing various details, they begin to understand the nature of such relations systematically. Finally, with this complete understanding of the construction of the meaning of the periphery in the imperial representational systems, these peripheral intellectuals are able to intervene by restructuring the meaning of that system. According to Pratt, the European subjects display an obsessive need to present and represent its peripheries, a model of power precisely mirrored in the patterns of signification internal to the text. Now, this allows the possibility of reading against the grain to find indigenous modes of expression and oppressed voices inscribed within the narrative of the conqueror. As Stephen H. Clark argues that every travel account is thus said to possess this heteroglossic function. If a contact zone is created at the imperial periphery by the presence of the bearers of metropolitan authority, the colonial travelers from the transcultured contact zone have also made the quote unquote reverse journey, which Michael Fisher terms as counterflow, from the periphery towards the center. The experience of travel and the memories of home drive the intellectual to reconsider the imperial records and restructure the imperial imaginary. In fact, the colonial travelers' very presence in the metropole, that is the parent state of a colony, renders visible the communities that inhabit the landscape, which are unknowable from the imperial point of view. Pratt also argues that out of the encounter in the contact zone, there arises a planetary consciousness, which not only profoundly reshapes life at the periphery of the imperial system, but also fundamentally alters the socio-cultural relationship in the metropolitan society. Beyond the material consequences of Euro expansionism, the contact zone engenders a crucial conflict of representation. Pratt turns to travel writing as a primary vehicle for this representational commerce born out of the contact zone. On one hand, the imperial metropolis tends to understand itself as determining the periphery, while on the other hand, it blinds itself to the ways in which the periphery determines the metropolis. Pratt's treatment of imperial metropolitan travel writing thus amounts to critique of ideology. Now, Itisamuddin's The Wonders of Vilayet can be read as an autoethnographic expression, as counterbalancing textual responses to counteract dominant Western voices, and we shall discern a constant shift between resistance to and compliance with the Western voices. Itisamuddin was a Sayyid, that is the descendant of Prophet Muhammad, whose family fled the Mongol invasion of Central Asia and came to India sometime in the 16th century. Once in India, the family used its cultural pedigree to forge careers in law and administration, which is where things were until the mid-18th century, when the expansion of the East India Company under Robert Clive provided Itisamuddin with the opportunity to travel abroad. The Mughal Emperor, Shah Alam II, beleaguered by enemies, implored the protection of his Britannic Majesty's troops. It was not in Robert Clive's power to place British soldiers in the service of a foreign court. So it was agreed that a letter containing this request would be dispatched together with a present of 1 lakh rupees from the emperor to his British counterpart, George III. This mission was entrusted to Christian that an Indian well versed in Persian should be there so that the letter's content could be properly interpreted. Mirza Sheikh Itisamuddin was chosen to accompany him. Robert Clive said that he would himself follow with the letter and the gift. After a long 6-month voyage, Swinton and Itisamuddin arrived in Britain and spent 1.5 years awaiting Clive. When he finally arrived, Clive suppressed the letter and presented the money on his own behalf to George III. Though nothing fruitful came out of this mission, It provided Itasamuddin with the material for a fascinating memoir that was named Shigurf-Nama-e-Vilayet, originally written in Persian, the then language of Indian ruling elite. And this was translated into English by Kaiser Haq. And the name of the book was The Wonders of Vilayet, being the memoir originally in Persian of a visit to France and Britain in 1765. This memoir includes Itasamuddin's journey through Pegu, Malacca, Maldives, Madagascar, Cape Town, France, and before the itinerant narrator arrives England. Itasamuddin's memoir asserts that the West too had its share of mystery that had to be unraveled for the curious visitor from the East. As Amrita Satpathy argues that rendering the foreign familiar was an agenda of the travel writings of the travelers from the East to the West. They exhibit a certain self-consciousness and sensibility that give a definite shape to their encounters in foreign lands. Their negotiation with people, locale, society, customs, and language is a mediation between the observer and the observed. Itasamuddin's memoir demystifies Vilayet in more than one ways. He can be seen as a cultural interlocutor involved in unraveling the West for the East and vice versa. Itasamuddin's memoir is secular and multicultural in its approach, in the sense that it thwarts the imperialist agenda of laying claim to a historical, insular, all-white England, as Michael Fisher puts it. Now, Itasamuddin paints a very free-flowing picture of India and Britain, one that is not monolithic. As Fisher, in his Counterflows to Colonialism, substantiates this thought by saying that educated Indians who traveled to Britain, I quote, resisted British dominance, proved their own agendas, and sought to reshape British rule according to their own values, although usually from a position of subordination, unquote. In Wonders of Vilayet, we shall discern a constant shift between subordination and domination. Throughout this memoir, Itasamuddin keeps on shifting between accepting and rejecting the colonial power. His infatuation and admiration with the British hardly undermines his love for his own people and religion. At some places, he talks about the exotic India, the pomp and the massive wealth and extra. At other places, he glorifies the English way of life. Nevertheless, he tries to counter the negative discourse about the Indians rampant in the West, all the while underscoring the sensibility, if not the intelligence of the Indians. Itasamuddin makes bountiful use of first-person narrative technique to reinforce his stance as a traveler, who is certainly not the other. The first-person mode of narration provides veracity, precision, reliability, authenticity, and the legitimacy that had hardly characterized earlier travel writings. The confessional tone and the assertiveness of the narrator helps him build a connection with the reader. He is not merely a spectator or a bystander who observes things from the sidelines. It is as if Europe sees him too as he sets foot on the English shore at Dover. This process gets initiated. Itasamuddin writes, I quote, "The English had never seen an Indian dressed as I was. They considered me a great curiosity and flocked to have a look. The assembled ladies and gentlemen thronged round me in wide-eyed amazement and examined my robe, turban, shawl, and other parts of my costume. They continued to stare at my clothes and countenance while I gazed at their astonishing loveliness. How ironic that I, who had gone there to enjoy a spectacle, became a spectacle myself. Unquote. Wherever Itisamuddin goes in Britain, he excites curiosity and apprehension, especially among children who took him for a black devil and kept away in fear. This indicates a level of racism taught to children who associated evil with skin color. The grown-ups took him as a brother of the Nawab, dressed in his full regalia of pajama, trousers, and a long loose shirt with a kamarband which held a dagger, a shawl thrown over the shoulder, turban, and gilt embroidered shoes. Now, Itasamuddin evoked curiosity and wonder. He was lionized by the English. In fact, Persia, with its 5,000 years of recorded history, with its flora and fauna, with its religious practices, always appealed to the Europeans. Thus, Itasamuddin's transformation into an Eastern potentate or a monarch secures his social success and his elegant bon mot inevitably suggest a flattering identification with the British. Thus, the spectacle actually has a greater effect. It becomes a mode through which Itasamuddin develops his identity during his stay in England. And of course, in the streets of England, where the gazer is gazed upon. Later, when Captain Swinton desires to take Itasamuddin with him on a tour, the latter deduces an ulterior motive behind the captain's words and observes, I quote from the text, actually, the true reason behind Captain Swinton's invitation was that ignorant people seeing me in my Indian gentleman's costume would take me for a nobleman, perhaps a Nawab's brother, and would infer that since Captain Swinton had brought me as a traveling companion, he must have risen to a great eminence in Bengal. Unquote. Here we find an indication of Captain Swinton basking in the reflected glory that Itasamuddin is supposed to have, and not the other way round. Itasamuddin never fails to praise the city of London, the Tower, its many armories, St. Paul's Cathedral, and he marvels at its splendid architecture, but doesn't forget to mention that the only comparable stone edifice in India is the mausoleum of Sultan Muhammad Adil Shah in Bijapur in the Deccan. He visits the Westminster Abbey, at which he was speechless with amazement. He also visits the King's Palace, the King's Garden, the magnificent Queen's Palace, and all these arouse wonder and excitement, so much so that he involuntarily exclaims, I quote, "If there is heaven on the face of earth, it is this," unquote. He also visits the Oxford University, which he calls the Madrasa of Oxford, where for the first time he sees a physics laboratory, a telescope, and a human skeleton. He also goes to the British Museum, the theatre, and so on. He marvels at the cartographical advancements of the English, and there are pages after pages when he reflects on the different systems of religion, education, administration, and especially the judiciary in England in a comparative mode. He writes, I again quote, unlike Bengal, tax and revenue collectors in England do not resort to extortion. English law also differs from Muslim law in the punishment of theft, whereas law orders that the thief should have a hand cut off if more than 8 annas worth is stolen. English law prescribes the death penalty for all thieves. Here he seems not to be in favor of capital punishment. I unquote. The more he observes them, the more he admires the sheer industry and the inventiveness of the British people. He writes, I quote, they, that is the British, engage in researches in science, medicine, and technology, make scholarly studies in fields like history and philosophy, seek means to improve the efficiency of factories and machinery, and write books so that mankind may benefit from their discoveries. There is one particular instance where Itasamuddin goes to the Haymarket to see a freak giantess on exhibition there. As he pays for the ticket and approaches her, she herself comes forward, laughing to see this dark-skinned Indian man. He writes, I quote, we stared at each other, unquote. It is as if wonder confronts wonder. Itasamuddin is thus also the typical ambivalent tourist who tells a lot about himself and his home culture, as about the places and cultures he visits. He never fails to praise the English for their scientific temper, anatomical advancement, technological progress, their physical prowess, and their military prowess. And also, he feels ashamed and sorrowful of the Indian gentry who are engrossed in writing poems in Persian and Hindi in, I quote, praise of a mistress's face or of the wine, the goblet, or a board, unquote. But at the same time, he rationalizes and grasps the fact that intellectual and technical superiority is no match for aesthetic sensibility, which is, I quote, not measured, which is not measured by worldly wealth, but consists in acquiring knowledge, in leading an upright life, and in obeying the laws of Allah and his prophet, unquote. Itasamuddin doesn't approach the British culture with a sense of inferiority, particularly at a time when the British drive for cultural hegemony over India was beginning to develop. He admits his own society's less advanced knowledge of physical sciences and technology. Yet he remains a staunch advocate of his national ways of life, his own religion and customs. He neatly fits in the role of a sharply observant traveler who criticizes European society and draws parallels with the Eastern institutions and practices, thereby fulfilling the criteria of an autoethnographic text. At one point, he writes, I quote, there is no country in the world where there are no stupid and ignorant people. In fact, everywhere they are the majority, unquote. It is here that Itasamuddin counters the insolent British. He puts forward a very pan-Islamic worldview towards his religion. At the same time, he challenges the idea of Islamophobia, which was rampant in the West. It is indeed religion that boils down to the crucial difference between halal, that is the food which is ritually sacrificed, and haram, that causes the final tension between Captain Swinton and Itasamuddin and prompts him to hurry back home. Until late into his stay, he has been eating halal food cooked by his personal cook, Muhammad Hakim, whom he has brought from India. But then Swinton begins to insist that when they go on journeys, Itasamuddin should leave Muhammad Hakim behind and eat what Swinton and others will eat. This leads to a major rift between them. Swinton says that the only explanation behind Itasamuddin's such rigid behavior is that, I quote, "You are a Bengali, and the Bengalis are notorious among Indians for their folly and stupidity," unquote. To this particular humiliation, Itasamuddin a little later asserts that, I quote, "When I set out for Vilayet, I was anxious on account of the temptations that lay in wait for me. The Almighty has compassionately answered my prayer and kept me in good health," unquote. It is his abstinence which is the secret behind his good health, he says. Thus, he posits himself as an uncompromising, unwavering, and an unyielding Muslim throughout his stay in Vilayet. One must keep this in mind that halal is not just food, rather, it amounts to his gravitas, stability, so that even Swinton acknowledges that, I quote, "In all the time I spent in Bengal, I never saw such a strict Muslim as this man is," unquote. The time when Itasamuddin was visiting England, the British were one of the many warring forces competing for supremacy in India and not yet in complete command, except indirectly in Bengal. This helps Itasamuddin to espouse a stance which is confident and powerful enough for him to see all things in an unintimidated perspective. Though, in the heart of hearts, he feared the gradual ascendancy of the British. He writes, I quote, "Those who only yesterday were supplicants for 40 bighas of land are today masters of one half of India and have brought to their knees a host of proud, arrogant chieftains," unquote. Itasamuddin creates for himself a Muslim, Indo-Persian, Bengali identity in a Christian England. This allows him the literary and personal agency to strengthen his national identity and to reclaim his faith as a devout follower of Almighty and as a descendant of Prophet Muhammad. This experience is not limited to Itasamuddin, as will be seen in the later travelers like Abu Talib. In the concluding sections of his memoir, when Itasamuddin's estrangement with Captain Swinton is prominent. The former asserts, I quote, when Swinton's importunities exceeded all bounds, giving way to taunts and aspersions on my faith, religion, and native mores, I began to fear that I could not rely on Captain's friendship. Unquote. He further retorts, again I quote, I would rather live in poverty in my own country than in affluence in yours. And to me, the dusky Indian women are dearer than the fairy-faced Firangi damsels. Unquote. These damsels he initially addresses as huris, and now he deglamours them. Itasamuddin thus firmly establishes himself as a pluralistic traveler in the context of 18th century travel narrative, who is engaged in delivering specific facts and events to audiences in a comprehensible manner. A certain degree of heterogeneity underscores his writing. His engagement with the Britons is very cognitive, and the wonder and the curiosity of the West are all dissected from a dialectical perspective. He thus is more than a passive onlooker, as I have already argued, and he navigates the cultural topography of Vilayet, all the while laying the foundations of the politics of travel. Thus, writing in the contact zone, Itasamuddin's narrative sheds light on the socio-cultural dimensions of the British life, and his attempts of writing back thus produces an autoethnographic text whereby an Indian dares to resist the British claims of supremacy. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much, Suranjima, for that wonderful presentation where you talked about transculturation, the colonial space, colonial gaze, the contact zone, Mary Louise Pratt, autoethnography, and of course, you introduced us to travel writing from Itasamuddin's point of view. This is something that when you were a student in our department was very, very marginal. It's not taught so much, but over the years, 10 years or more, travel writing is very much part of the popular courses that our department has to offer. It's not only Amrita, but others who have also started teaching this. There are students who are interested in this. They are taking to this paper in large numbers. So travel writing is very much a growing trend in cultural studies and literature. So if there are as such no questions for you, so if anybody would like to unmute himself or herself and ask a question, he or she is absolutely free to go ahead. So if there are any questions that you need to ask, you can just unmute yourself and ask the question directly to Suranjima. Okay, so any questions?
Shudev, may
May
I?
I say?
Yes, please. I think there was a question coming.
Shudev, may I?
Yes, please go ahead.
Right. So Suranjima, thank you very much for that very lucid and closely argued presentation. I don't really have a pointed question, so to speak. I kept wondering about Dr. Aziz in A Passage to India. And so my question would be, do you see an overlap in representation and a kind of doubling of the gaze vis-a-vis the Muslim traveler or the Indian Muslim, the educated Indian Muslim who engages with the West without at any point compromising the distinctiveness of their identity? I think that some of that goes very subtly into the remarkable characterization of Dr. Aziz. And a related question to you would be regarding your argument. So what is resistance about? I mean, where do you see the rationale for the kind of resistance that you seem to be arguing as evident in this author? Is it a resistance based upon a pretty flat opposition, cultural opposition or binarization? There's an absolutist position which I found a little naive. I've seen similar articulations in early modern British narratives, for instance, particularly where the British travelers are going to the Middle East. I'm thinking about Coriat's crudities, for instance. So the kind of stereotyping that we note there about the racial other or the religious other is somewhere being doubled here, even as it's coming from a colonial Indian traveler who's looking at the British space. So I find that a bit mechanical. It's all about constructing yourself entirely in opposition to what you see as a stereotypical West, which is just as reductive as the Western traveler makes it out to be vis-a-vis the Indian native. So I don't really see a correction of the gaze there. Would you like to talk about that?
Thank you, Anunadi. Thank you for your question. Yes, you were right in addressing that these resistance are pretty flat. It is interesting to note that, these travelogues that are written during the pre-Sepoy mutiny manifest the sentiments of only emergent colonialism. Only the formulation just initiates the formulation of one's own identity and nationalistic causes. And these are like implicit evidences which are only in the formative stage, Anunadi. Thus, I can say that these travel texts are post-colonial even as colonialism begins. So there is no such watertight resistance, one can say, but the resistance are pretty flat. It's true.
Right. And Dr. Aziz, would you see any resonances there?
Yes, I see find some resonances there too.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anunadi.
Thank you, Ananda. Thank you, Suranjima. Are there any more questions?
Shudev, can I come in?
Yes, Samrita, of course.
Right. It's a very sort of moving occasion for me, because part of Suranjima's research was done under my supervision. But Suranjima, there are one of the things I just wanted you to just add. One is that this is being written, the wonders of Vilayet are being written within the Parsi tradition, within the tradition of the Safarnama. So I thought you could have brought that in the wonders, in the sense that the Safarnama would habitually talk about the term use the term wonder, which is another important configuration. So while you're talking about resistance, I think the basic thrust of Ismaddin's travelogue, as is with Abu Talib, is with the idea of difference. One. The second thing that I just wanted you to just talk about a little bit is, you see, Ismaddin is writing in around the 1757 onwards. Deen Muhammad writes in 1794, and then you have Abu Talib writing in 1803, translated in 1810. After that, what happens to the Muslim travelogue to the West? That seems to completely dry up, doesn't it? Till the beginning of the next century, when Syed Ahmad Khan comes in. But within this period, what happened so that this entire tradition of the Muslim travelogue to the West dried up? I would say, and it was gradually replaced by a proliferation of the Hindu travelogue, as it were.
Yes, Amrita, that's true. I could have added that too.
No, what happens? I'm going to say, would you like to add to that? What happens to this, tradition of the Muslim travelogue to the West? Does it disappear? Or is it that we do not have records of it, basically because it was inaccessible and in a different language?
Amrita, I think we don't have access to those so because of the language, so to say. And this text, it is important to note that Ittasamuddin writes in Persian, but it was translated into Bengali. First, it was translated into Bengali, though the translation was not quite good. And later on, Kaiser Haq translates it from the Bengali version and not from the Persian version. So language was a barrier indeed, I guess.
Thank you, Suranjima. I was just wondering if I could add on to Amrita's question, in the sense that even as late as the 1830s, in fact, 1828, when Desrosiers is writing to India, my native land, the general approach, the general attitude of the West, particularly England, but also parts of Germany, France, was that India was a continuation of the Islamic culture, Islamic land. It is as late as 1857 that Bahadur Shah Zafar was on the throne of India. So the approach of the West towards the Indian Muslim traveler, and the approach after 1857 of the Indian travelers, who basically shifts his viewpoints from being seen as an Islamic representative rather than the Indian representative. I think there's a lot of reading between the lines that we'll have to do, because the kind of books that I have seen while doing my bit regarding hunting narrative is that it is also at this time that there is this plethora of writers and people coming down from the West to India. So it is during this period that there's this huge influx of the actual relationship of travel that comes in. If you look at it as a reverse colonial snobbery, the colonial snobbery comes in at the first position. So how would you like to react to this? How did the West look at Ittasamuddin as primarily an Indian representative, or representing a larger culture which was crossing across boundaries, national boundaries, all the way from the Caliphate to the extension of the Indian Empire?
Sudevda, thank you so much. So, Sudevda, I think that Ittasamuddin was not only a Muslim representative, rather he was representing India in a sense that he was talking about Indian customs, Indian cultures in general, not only about Muslim cultures or Muslim customs. So the West saw him as not merely a Muslim, what should I say, not as a Muslim individual, but as an Indian individual, I guess.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions?
Hello. I am Ejaz Hussain.
Yes, sir. Azadda, please ask.
Suranjima,
Yes, sir.
do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
It's very good paper, Suranjima.
Thank you so much, sir.
And have you gone through the Shagrafnama?
No, I'm so sorry because it was originally written in Persian, so I don't have any
No,
idea.
it has been translated also. Its translation is available.
Yes.
Have you gone through it?
No, I haven't gone through the Bengali translation because I couldn't get hold of one. I have only gone through the English translation.
Okay. And Mirza Abu Talib?
Yes,
His-
Mirza
his-
Abu Talib, I have read. Yes, yes.
Have
But
you
not the
gone through it?
Persian one. Yes, I have gone through the English translation of Mirza Abu Talib's work. The Travels of Mirza Abu Talib, that was published in 1810.
Okay, and Deen Muhammad.
Yes, yes. Deen Muhammad. Deen
If
Muhammad,
you
in fact,
make a comparative study of all the three travelers, then you will be able to reach a conclusion. Actually, I have also contributed a paper on
Okay,
the
sir.
travel account of Mirza Abu Talib.
Okay, that's great.
Have you seen it?
No, sir, I haven't, but I would love to.
It was published in 2011. Okay.
Okay, sir. Okay,
And
okay.
it is in the actually the felicitation of volume of Professor Anirudh Ray. Okay.
Okay, okay, okay.
Here, what I have seen, particularly in case of Mirza Abu Talib's narratives, then I have gone through Deen Muhammad and this Ittisamuddin also. The question actually arises, why these Indians they reached England, how they were able to mix in the British society. Mirza Abu Talib and this Ittisamuddin both were introduced into the British society. Even they were able to meet the Queen also. They freely mixed with them. They also, I mean, shared their views. And so far as this Abu Talib is concerned, he visited several factories also.
Yes.
And what the technological development, the industrial development, particularly after the industrial revolution which took place in England, he realized all these things and he has written about it. Okay.
True. Right.
And the title which I have given of my paper is An Encounter with Occidental Technology. Actually, how an Indian or an Oriental prince, in case of Ittisamuddin or this Mirza Abu Talib, they went there. And how they, I mean, they were allowed to mix freely, and it does this. They also try to learn English also.
True.
Okay, and
Right.
this technological development which they were shown, that is very important in the narratives because they have mentioned these details also. Actually, it was in my view a kind of the the British that we know as the white man's burden, or the British, they tried to establish that it was their duty to to educate and they tried to establish how the British were able to conquer this entire Indian subcontinent. And they tried to, hence this question is very important. Okay, they went, and what were the purpose? Have you seen the account of in the account of Ittisamuddin any such type of some elements? Have you seen anything like that? Suranjima.
Suranjima,
Shudev, can I come in, Shudev, for a moment with response to
please.
Ijazda's comment?
Hello. Suranjima is
Shudev,
not
can you hear
available.
me? Ijazda,
Amrit,
can I just respond to what you just said?
Amrit, you can, no problem.
Yes. Ijazda, it's very heartening because I am teaching Abu Talib to MA students this year as part of the travel writing course. I can push. Now, as you
Oh,
said,
good.
all three of them arrive in different ways. One is that Itzemauddin goes as an envoy. Din Muhammad goes as a soldier who goes off with one of the East India Company soldiers, Colonel Baker. And very strangely, Abu Talib goes because he's a pauper, he wants to die. So he does not go there as a nobleman, but once he lands up there, he's introduced to British society as a kind of a Persian prince. And out of all these three travelers, it is Abu Talib alone who has this superior kind of a gaze. He treats the English as their equal. And it is because of this that I think he was taken to different factories, as you very rightly pointed out. And Ijazda must have also, you must have also located Mushirul Hassan's very important book on Abu Talib's travels.
Yes, he has written.
Mushirul Hassan talks about Abu Talib being the first Indian to make a direct correlationship between British technological superiority and British dominance of the world. So it's very important, all these three travelogues become very important as parts of the early analysis of the empire, especially, Abu Talib. So thank you, Ijazda. I would make a small request. If you can send me a copy of your paper, I'll circulate it among my students who are reading different articles on Abu Talib, and they can also take a look at your paper.
Amrit.
Yes.
Hello, Amrit.
Yes, Vijay.
My paper is available on Academia Edu.
Academia. Okay.
You can download it. Otherwise, you can send me your email. Okay.
Okay. You send me the copy so that I
send me your email. Yes. I will attach and send it to you. Okay.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Amritas. Thank you, Sayedda. Is there any more question directed towards Suranjima? Kindly unmute yourself and directly ask Suranjima any question, any query, maybe an observation. Bipashadi, would you like to come in?
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Thank you, Suranjima. Thank you, Shudev. Suranjima, it was excellent. It was really heartwarming to listen to you. I would just like to make an observation that these kind of travel writings, they have become very much a part of our historical discipline of history. There are many people who are working on these kind of travelogues, and as you very rightly pointed out, this was one of the earliest. But there's been a lot of work on 19th century, but in 18th century, this was so very interesting. It's one of the earliest. I really thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bipashadi.
Thank you, Bipashadi. Thank you, Suranjima. Would there be a last question for Suranjima before we move on to the vote of thanks? Anybody would like to put in a question somewhere? Right. So if there are no questions, then it's my it's time for me to sort of move on to the words of thanks. Visva-Bharati Dialogic, Visva-Bharati Young Scholars Lecture Series. We just finished our 6th version, 6th lecture. We would like to thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Vidyut Chakraborty, who was behind this idea. He was the one who proposed this. In addition to the already flourishing Visva-Bharati lecture series, that would give this that would use this as a platform for young scholars, primarily within the university, and as we unfold and as we expand, we can introduce people beyond. We have been functioning since January. We haven't had one in June, but we have, within the last 6 months, we have got 6 lectures. Incidentally, we can have one more maybe later this month or in early August from our very own Dr. Kishore Chandra Swai from the Polli Shikha Vibhag. We must also thank our speaker, Dr. Suranjima Saha, Assistant Lecturer of Patho Bhavan. We thank our in-house internet specialist and person who's been the backbone behind all our presentations, Kaushik Ghosh from the Central Library. We will thank Arpan Mukherjee from Kala Bhavan, who's behind all these wonderful flyers and posters. In fact, this is one of the best posters that Arpan has designed, keeping in mind the historical background of the thing that is being talked about and the brilliant architecture that was introduced. We will thank Dr. Chitralika Maiti for introducing Dr. Suranjima Saha. And finally, we must thank Professor Bipasha Raha, our mentor, who's been guiding all of us together in this successful lecture series. And finally, and not the least, our audience for being with us for almost more than an hour and 10 minutes. We know that there has been some problems with all not being able to join, specifically from Patho Bhavan and Shikha Shatra, because they have begun their class 10 and class 12 examination from today onwards. So thank you for being with us, and we hope to catch you later this month or definitely next month for the seventh lecture in the series. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shudev.
Thank you.
You.